things that a lot of us have heard about. It's a subject that I talk about in my new book, which is called Aquarius Dawns, is that we're moving in from this 2,200-year-long cycle, this Piscean age, into this emerging Aquarian age. And this isn't an overnight experience. There's many, many decades, many centuries actually, that this transition occurs. But it seems to be one of the peak time periods in our collective history for this major shift occurring. So we can look back at the 60s as one of the major impetuses for this shift. Now, in the 60s, we had this real big revolution with sexuality, with, they said free love. But a lot of what was happening in the 60s was experimentation, sort of a discovery process. And now, what's happening is that the same planets that were together in the sky in the 60s, Uranus and Pluto, they're coming together again. In fact, they've been together for the last 2 years. But instead of a conjunction when they were in the same sign as they were in the 60s, now they're in a square. The square is a 90-degree relationship. 90-degree angles when two forces are like running down the street, two characters, and they meet, they butt heads. They have to battle with each other to actually form something more enduring, stronger, and more powerful as those two forces come together. Whereas in the conjunction, the energy is more chaotic because the two forces are sort of blending and bleeding into each other. So what we have is this force of Uranus, which is this great awakener. Uranus is the force inside of us that brings us epiphanies, where the light bulb goes off, where we have the aha. It's a planet that represents freedom, revolution, rebellion, and it's about authenticity, really discovering who this individual is. And it also represents people's movements. Now, Uranus is awakening, exciting, and enlightening the Plutonian energy. The Plutonian energy in us, this character of Pluto is the Lord of death and rebirth. He's the Lord of transformation. It's that part of us that knows that I have to die to one part of myself in order to be reborn as something more evolved, something more powerful, something greater than I was before. Pluto's a force that forces us to go beyond through the process of surrender. But Pluto also represents everything hidden, everything in the underworld.
That radiator.
What's the heater? Okay. Pluto's rising from the underworld. So, this force, Pluto also represents all the taboos, like the secrets, the hidden, the unconscious. What happened in the 60s was that this energy really started to rise. We started to deal with what, like in the 50s, was we didn't talk about it. It was mute. We didn't go there. So what happens is these two forces are coming together, trying to actualize now a much deeper, more empowered version of and more free version of the individual self. And every time that Uranus and Pluto come together in the sky, which is about every 45 years, for at least 5, sometimes 6, 7 years, they'll meet, go back and forth, touching each other. What happens collectively on the earth is that there is this great awakening process throughout all of culture. And it's exciting, but it's very challenging. And one of the things that gets challenged is our social mores and all of our sexual stories. Everything we've held as what has been before actually gets ignited to move towards something more liberated, more free. So you can trace back throughout history all of the feminist movements, the major feminist movements, the first voting rights, the movements with Elizabeth Cady Stanton and all these famous feminists in the 1800s. Most of the feminist movements, including in the 60s, the pill-less contraception, and the empowered feminine, the empowered goddess, always come during Uranus-Pluto cycles. Well, starting in 2010, and through this decade, we have another connection of this Uranus-Pluto energy. So the goddess energy is really awakening, and that includes the energy of Shakti, or the female sexuality, and part of this is about an awakening of the Shiva Shakti, the sacred masculine, the sacred feminine. So, in this process, we're actually breaking through some of the experiences that have governed really the last couple of thousand years, this Piscean age. And what is shifting here is this, see, in Pisces, we have a projection field. We have a projection of a savior, a messiah, a redeemer. And that can also look like someone, like in a relationship, that is going to save us or redeem us. This is the idea of the one, the ideal, the one soulmate. Now, a lot of that energy got started with some of the religious traditions, and especially around Christianity, where this story was written about a savior that was going to come and save us instead of us save ourselves. This is the story that's really shifting in the emerging Aquarian age. With our technologies now, and with the spiritual traditions that we can tap into from every culture and every point of history, we can no longer project a Messiah, a Savior, a Redeemer on anything outside of ourselves. Nor can we project guilt or blame on anyone else or on ourselves. Aquarius energy is about the liberated aspect of freedom, and it's a humanitarian archetype. Its energy is about liberating all beings. It's about tapping into energy itself, not being governed by a story. And Pisces is a sign of mythology, religion, and belief systems. But what's dying, what's shedding, is the belief that something outside is our savior. And what's being born now in Aquarius is that we have to be the Christ consciousness. We have to be the anointed ones. We have to be the bodhisattvas, or the enlightened beings who are serving everyone else, working in our communities, tapping into our creative powers in order to serve the collective. Aquarius is all about collective energy, collective movements. So the way this taps into our relationships is that we can no longer run stories of guilt or blame or victimization. What's happening is there's a remembrance going on about the fundamental innocence that we all are. And this is about this remembrance of the spark of creative energy that we all come from, the source. Whatever you want to call that, what's happening and what we're being invited into is to have this sense of a reflection in each person that we meet of that source that we come from. Now, this source is a source that has birthed us. None of us totally understand this mystery. But it's a source of infinite love. So what we're realizing is that love is not something that can be owned or possessed, and it's not something that we can even label. It's something that's infinite, that is abundant. So one of the big shifts that's happening, and it's really a challenging shift for a lot of us because most of us have not been conditioned this way. Most of us have been conditioned that we've come from a capitalistic, consumeristic culture that is about competition. And that factors in, each one of us has to realize that that factors into our relationships. That there's this storyline about competing for this person, about having this, owning this, not having enough love, I'm not good enough for love. And all of that is needing to shift with a re-identification of who we really are, which is infinite creative potential. That takes radical responsibility. And that scares a lot of us. Because if I'm going to be radically responsible, I can't blame anyone anymore. The only way you can be empowered as an individual is to take total responsibility for everything that you do. So that there's no authority any longer outside of ourselves. No government, no religion, no parents. The authority has to come within ourselves. And the word authority is like author, authoring our own lives, scribing our own story. So in terms of relationship, we're learning how can we step up and support each other, accessing the most amount of freedom in our connection, the freedom to be authentically ourselves. In the Course in Miracles is a very powerful teaching. And in the Course in Miracles, this teaching is really stressed that when we start to identify as this infinite creative potential, instead of as a consciousness that lacks something, when we start to identify with the abundance, the love that is what we are, not something that we have, different than possessing love we are the love, then we can no longer lack it, so we don't have to try to own it or grasp hold of something. This is a huge shift for most of us. And, so in this process, what's starting to happen is people are looking at each other, interacting with each other, loving each other in a different way. And we're questioning what we've been conditioned or how we were raised. And what's happening is that we're looking for reflections of how can I be more free. And what's going to happen more and more as the decade continues, as the Aquarian age continues to emerge, is that if we encounter another energy that tries to label us or over-define us or over-define our connection, the natural impulse is going to be to rebel against that because it's too limiting and to move towards the direction of greater freedom. Now, that means that a lot of us may start to open on this journey and are opening now to having multiple lovers at the same time. Because this energy is allowing us to remember the love that we are instead of being possessed by one or possessing one. And Jay, you said something interesting the other day about sharing yourself. It's easy to share yourself, but not easy to share your partner.
I believe the wording was it's easier to be shared than to share.
So that's a very powerful statement. And, we often want to feel like we're above the law or something like that, ourselves. But actually, what we're being tested in right now is how transparent can we be with each other. Transparency, honesty, integrity, radical responsibility. And how can we reflect to each other that we don't have to be one particular thing. And then we never did anything wrong along the way. That we're remembering that the only thing that makes us feel like we're wrong is an ego that feels itself separate from its source. That ego is going to continue to tell people out there that they're to blame, or ourselves that we're not doing it right enough or good enough, or that we need to apologize for something. As soon as we move into the apologetic space, we're starting to move into the ego. Because the ego is saying, I did something wrong, I'm to blame. Or you did something wrong, you should be sorry for it. But in relationships, what that creates is, I want you, so-and-so that I'm dating or looking at online or whatever it may be, I want you to fulfill this, 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 this for me. And I think I can fulfill this, 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 and this for you. And then when that stops happening, I'm going to leave you to find someone else who's going to fulfill this, 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 and this for you. Meanwhile, the whole journey is false because it's just the ego whose desire nature is changing all the time. So no one will ever fulfill that ever-changing list of things. Only the re-identification of the ego with its source can do that. That there isn't a lack, and there isn't anyone that can fulfill anything for us. We're already complete as we are. So what are we doing in relationship? We're reminding each other of that. We're remembering. And the word remember means to put back together. Remember. All the parts of who we are. Of God, or goddess, or the source. The source dismembered itself to be known by itself. And that's what we're doing. Oh, look at this spark, and this spark, and this spark. And that's what's happening with people, is starting to explore polyamory and open relationships, multiple partners. Is that we're seeing that actually I have these soul contracts with a lot of souls in the world. There's about 6-7 billion people. You would think that you probably have a few soulmates, not just one. Just a numbers game. But beyond that, every one of us has probably had those experiences of meeting one person, meeting another person, and immediately there's this sense of, I already know you. We've done this work before, somewhere along the line. We may be completing something here. There's a karma, there's action that we've already done, and now it's coming to a fruition. What are we learning? What are we resolving? What are we clearing? And also...